Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to once again speak out against the administration's proposal to revive Yucca Mountain. And I know you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again, and I assure you I'll say it again in the future. Yucca Mountain is dead, and Nevada will not be our nation's nuclear waste dump. I conveyed that message in my meeting to Secretary Perry during his confirmation, and again reiterated it ahead of his speech, his visit to Yucca in March. And my former colleague, Senator Harry Reid, was a powerful and outspoken opponent of Yucca, and he worked hard to make sure the project did not see the light of day. Now, Mr. President, I'm standing between this administration and Yucca. And I say to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that I will be leading this fight. This is a reckless proposal. Over the last 30 years, the federal government has wasted billions of taxpayer dollars to design and permit Yucca Mountain, all without any signal that Nevada would consent to it. A state without a single nuclear power plant should not have to shoulder the entire nation's nuclear waste burden. I will not be run over by the desires of other states that want to move the nuclear waste that they produce, that they create out of their own backyards, and put it into ours. I'll say it again. Nevada will not be our nation's nuclear waste dump. Last week's accident at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington State serves as a chilling reminder of what Nevada could have had to deal with Yucca Mountain. I'm relieved that no one was harmed after the tunnel collapsed, but believes it's a wake-up call to my colleagues. We need to find a viable solution to our nation's nuclear waste problem. In addition to the potential tragic loss of life, radiation exposure resulting from similar events at Yucca Mountain could shatter Nevada's economy. This is not to mention the threat of transportation accidents along the proposed waste transportation routes. What this means that under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, we're looking at shipping 9,495 rail casks and 2,800 trains and 2,600 trucks hauling 1 case each to Yucca Mountain over the next 50 years. If the capacity limit at Yucca is more than doubled, as has been discussed with the Department of Energy, we would ship 21,909 rail casks in about 6,700 trains and 5,025 trucks, these casks to Yucca Mountain. So I asked my colleagues, do you really believe that over the span of the next 50 years that there won't be one single transportation accident with an ensuing radiological release? And under the DOE's proposal, these shipments would use 22,000 miles of railways, 7,000 miles of highway, crossing over 44 states and the tribal lands of at least 30 Native American tribes, the District of Columbia, and 960 counties with a population of about 175 million people. Between 10 to 12 billion people live within the radiological region of influence for route shipments. That is, within 1/2 mile of these rail and highway routes. Mr. President, in effect, these rail and highway routes would impact most of the nation's congressional districts, estimated to show 330 districts. And for those of you who are not familiar with the West, I know you are, Mr. President, or Nevada, access to rail corridors or highways is often difficult because they're in such remote locations. If there was a spill or an accident, questions remain within the Department of Energy regarding their response time for emergency radiological exposure. This is not even to mention the issue of private ownership of rail right-of-ways, making it uncertain who would even control accident sites. What we do know is that the local communities would be the ones forced to suffer any type of long-term effect of radiation exposure. This is in a state that was home of our nation's nuclear test site and the surrounding communities which have suffered for years from resulting exposure. Mr. President, I ask my colleagues, should Nevada be forced once more shoulder this burden? Secretary Perry, in response to last week's accident, acknowledged our nation's problem with nuclear waste, saying that the nation could no longer kick the can down the road. Mr. President, I do not believe that our nation should continue to kick the can, or in this case, the cask, down the road. We must find a long-term viable solution in our nation's nuclear waste problem, and one of that is rooted in a consent-based siting. Mr. President, I stand ready to work with my colleagues on a solution that ensures that states have a voice in this process. Failure to do so will only serve to make this problem worse, risking future accidents similar to what we saw last week. We can no longer afford to look backwards at failed proposals of the past and waste even more taxpayer dollars. So indeed, and instead, we need to move forward on a real solution to a very real problem. Mr. President,